we're going to see it primarily in cable and satellite channels or pay TV. There are concerns about privacy. I think I remember the first time 25 years ago, I called American Express and they answered the phone, "Hello, Mr. Cole, how are you?" And I was frightened. It was scary. I was looking around, where are the cameras? And then when you understand what it is, it's a nice courtesy. For targetability to work, 4 things have to happen. 1, advertisers have to tell their customers exactly what information is being collected and why, and what's being done with it. 2nd, there have to be privacy statements not written by lawyers for lawyers. They can be written by lawyers, but not for lawyers. 3rd, there have to be serious penalties for anyone who violate those policies. And 4th, there has to be a simple opt-out, or perhaps an opt-in. But those who opt out have to be aware that they may have to start paying for things that other people will get for free. Continuing into the digital future, I think iPads are transformational. If we came back together in 2 years, I might change that from iPads are transformational to tablets are transformational. But right now, it's iPads. Samsung, HP, RIM, Motorola, they've all had a year to try to catch up with Apple and the iPad, and they haven't succeeded. The only people who caught up with Apple after a year was Apple itself with the iPad 2. It's as if the goalpost had been changed before the other team even took the field. My friends at Apple say off the record, they wouldn't say this on the record, because at Apple, if you speak on the record, you can be killed, and that's only a slight exaggeration. They say they were planning to cut the price of the iPad 2 by $150 to $200. But they looked around and they said, nobody's beating us on price. Nobody's beating us on features. Why bother? HP came out over the summer with their touchpad. Now, I know you pay these horribly inflated prices of close to $1,000, and that's why most of you go to the U.S. and buy them or get your friends to go to the U.S. and buy them, which is exactly what you should do. But our base price is $499 for the Wi-Fi version with 16 gigs. HP comes out with their touchpad, also Wi-Fi 16 gigs for $499. Nobody cared. 3 weeks later, seeing nobody was buying them, they dropped the price to $399, $100 cheaper. Nobody cared. Then they decided, HP made this amazingly radical decision that they were going to close down their entire electronics and PC division. They ended up firing their CEO over it. They may rethink it. And they decided to sell the remaining touchpads for $99. Finally, people cared. The problem was it cost HP $309 to make a touchpad. So the business model is clear. If you're willing to lose $210 per item, you've got a great business. So when the iPad came out, my first job was to say, my first goal, say, is this the 4th screen or does it replace the 2nd screen? I am now firmly convinced it replaces the 2nd screen. We think the PC is going away. We think only 4 to 6% of people who own PCs actually need PCs. Computer-assisted designers, heavy-duty number crunchers, writers. I don't know a single person who bought an iPad who didn't look at their computer and say, can I get rid of it? Some of them did. Some of them said, not yet. But keep in mind, the biggest limitation on the iPad comes not from the device, it came from the stubbornness of Steve Jobs. The refusal to have Adobe Flash, they could have put Flash on in a moment. Jobs was waging a war, which it looks like he's won, against Adobe. The refusal to have a USB port, that was Jobs wanting an environment he completely controlled. Now that he's gone, If other competitors come out and challenge, they'll put flash, they'll put USB on in an instant. And now they're facing their first real competition. Amazon, a company with real muscle, has announced and will release next month, in about 2.5 weeks, the Amazon Kindle Fire, a tablet smaller than the iPad, for $199 on day one. And keep in mind, the first Kindle was $359 2 years ago, is now $79. So it shows you how far they can drop. And they're pushing the Kindle as an entertainment device, as a place to watch television, to read newspapers, magazines, and books. Because one of the things that's clear is people, as I said earlier, television's going to grow. People's interest in television has never been greater. People's interest in the content, particularly on pay TV, has never been greater. But they are demanding to be unchained just from the set in the home. It's the job of television distributors to make sure that people can watch this with the proper subscriptions and controls wherever they want, where they can start on one screen, move to a second, and finish on a third. HBO has had spectacular success with their HBO Go app. That's if you subscribe to HBO through your cable or satellite subscriber, you can now watch that HBO when you're not in your home, on your mobile phone, on your iPad, or on your PC. So it's clear that's the direction it's going. But if all newspapers, magazines, and television do is move their content to tablets, they're already ahead of the game. Newspapers, we know that for a big city newspaper, only 1/3 of their budget goes to editors and writers. 2/3 goes to printing and distribution. So as they move to a tablet, 2/3 of their costs disappear. Tablets are more environmentally friendly. The New York Times, at its peak 4 years ago, printed 200 million pieces of paper a day, except on Sunday when it printed 2 billion pieces of paper, and then hires thousands of trucks using gasoline, spewing carbon into the air to deliver those papers. So they are far ahead in a digital environment. And the greatest advantage with television, newspapers, and magazines is I can be in Buenos Aires and I can get the New York Times before it lands on the doorstep in New York. I can take 20 magazines, 100 television shows, or I can watch off of my cable channels with things like HBO to go. Here in Buenos Aires, I don't have to be home. So if all they do is move content to the tablet, they're ahead of the game. Because keep in mind, people were never going to watch television or read newspapers on the internet. The internet's a lean-forward experience. You might read an article in the newspaper leaning forward on a desktop machine, but you weren't going to read the whole newspaper. You might watch a short clip from YouTube on your computer leaning forward, but you aren't going to watch a 30 or 60 or 90 or 2-hour show leaning forward. It's tablets that put television and newspapers and magazines and books in their proper environment leaning back. Also keep in mind in this tablet world, the mouse, we think, is going away. I gave a talk earlier this year in Barcelona at the World Mobile Congress. 4 people used the same example. They weren't stealing from each other. They just experienced the same thing themselves. 4 different people talked about their very young children going to the television set and going like this, and then saying, "Daddy, why is it broken?" And it is broken, because the way you navigate is with your body, with your hands, the most intuitive, natural way. If I hand an iPad to my 3-year-old son or my 83-year-old grandmother, both of them will be using it within 3 to 4 minutes. The only difference is the 3-year-old son will be showing me things I didn't know how to do. You hand a PC to a 3-year-old or to your grandmother. If your grandmother will even let you hand it to her, it may take her days or weeks to figure it out. Your son can probably figure it out in hours. Windows, Microsoft has announced that Windows 8, for Windows 8, the keyboard and the mouse is going to be optional. The way you navigate, the way television, we're always going to have a remote control because we're going to want to be in bed, but we're going to use tablets and other things as remote controls to be able to control intuitively with our bodies without having to use artificial interaction devices. A couple of other trends, social networking. We think social networking is the real deal. The first thing we have seen to cause people to log on to the web more than to check their email. 6 years ago, Rupert Murdoch bought MySpace for $580 million. And he said that he bought it because it would allow him to reach teenagers in a way that he couldn't reach them through his newspapers and was getting harder through his television networks. So at about the same time that Murdoch bought MySpace, we had released, this was 6 years ago, I said we're in year 11, we had released our 5th year's report. And reporters were asking me questions about all the things we were finding in year 5. And then the last question was, what do you think about Murdoch buying MySpace? And I said that I thought it was a great investment. That part of the quote has gotten lost forever. But that he would never be able to hang on to the teenage users of MySpace. And News Corp got really angry. And they fought back, not by saying, you're wrong, we will hang on to the teenage users. They fought back by saying, look how much money we're making. They're absolutely right. They paid $580 million, even though they sold it earlier this year to a group of investors, including Justin Timberlake, for $35 million. That wasn't a failure. They made a huge amount of money along the way. Almost the day they bought it for $580 million, they signed a $900 million ad share deal with Google, practically doubling their investment. They brilliantly marketed their Fox films and television shows on MySpace. They sold a lot of advertising, particularly compared to Bebo. Some of you know Bebo was sort of second-rate social networking site that 3 years ago AOL bought for $850 million and sold 2 years ago for $5 million. Actually, it sold last summer for $5 million. So Murdoch was right. They did make a lot of money, but we were right. They weren't able to hang on to their teenage users. It's not that we were so smart. We had seen the rise and fall of GeoCities in the early part of the century. We had seen the rise and fall of a network a few of you may have used, Friendster. And we said 6 years ago, and got a lot of quotes on this, we said 6 years ago that to a teenager, an online community is like a nightclub. And when the nightclub becomes too popular, or the uncool kids start showing up at the nightclub, you're out of there. Because the cost of going from one nightclub to another is nil. And as a matter of fact, as a teenager, what's the worst thing that could happen to you in a nightclub? Not literally the worst, that's somebody with a bomb or a gun coming in. But the worst thing that can happen to most teenagers in a nightclub, your mother walks in. Well, now your mother wants to friend you on Facebook. And how long are you going to hang around a place with your friends that your mother's hanging around? So last year, we released our 10th report. I was being interviewed by some of the same reporters, and they said,